Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today on this snowy Tuesday in January. My name is Wayona Nelson Davies, and I'm the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute. Welcome to our first Revenue Roundtable of 2024. Tonight, Governor McKee will be giving his 2024 State of State address. And on Thursday, he will be presenting his proposed FY25 state budget. And so this is an intentional time to have this conversation about solutions in investing in our communities. Yesterday, the country celebrated the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so I've been reflecting a lot on Dr. King's legacy. As we prepare for this roundtable, I thought about his famous I Had a Dream speech at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. More specifically, I've been reflecting on the parts of the speech that focus on economic justice. In that speech, Dr. King talked about America defaulting on the promissory note, especially when it comes to people of color, given by the Declaration of Independence that all of us were to be guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Dr. King urged us to refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt, that we must refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vault of opportunity of this nation. And so as most of us are preparing for the 2024 legislative session, I want us to reflect upon Dr. King's words and refuse to believe that there is not more that can be done to invest in our children, families, workers, businesses, healthcare, housing, the aging population, and communities that have been neglected for years. We have the solutions and the freedom to make budgetary and policy choices to create a more equitable society, a more equitable Rhode Island. Today, we will focus on one of those solutions, generating equitable revenue so that we can invest in us. Thanks to the over 100 participants who registered to join us here today, not just to talk about how we generate revenue in Rhode Island in a more equitable way, but how we can work together to ensure that the state budget reflects the value that all Rhode Islanders deserve to have life and liberty to thrive. Special thanks to our national partner, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, for graciously agreeing to present their Who Pays report. Thanks to the Revenue for Rhode Islander campaign for co-hosting this roundtable with the Economic Progress Institute. Before I invite speakers, I would like to give an overview of our time here today. The portion where we're going to have presentations will be recorded, and then we will stop the recording to invite coalition partners and the rest of you to join in the conversation. We'll begin with Alan Krensky, EPI's Director of Research and Fiscal Policy, who will present on the history of the Revenue for Rhode Islander campaign and the campaign's 2024 goal to raise revenue. We are excited that Carl Davis, the Research Director of ITEP, will join us to present on the 2024 Who Pays report. We will then hear from the co-sponsors of the Revenue for Rhode Island campaign, the Deputy Senate Majority Leader, Senator Melissa Murray, and the Chair of the House Special Legislation Committee, Representative Karen Alzante. Presentation part will be recorded. If you have questions, because there's so many of us, we ask that you put them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat and bring forth for the appropriate person to answer. Then after all of the presentations, we will stop and invite some of our coalition partners to talk about the impact of the budget and revenue on healthcare, housing, childcare, education, transportation, and the need to center equity in everything we do. I'm excited to begin this conversation because we believe this is a movement where we connect the dots between all the policies we care about and the budget and how we generate revenue for those policies. Before we get into our formal program, I would like to recognize Elaine Sweeney from the Secretary of State Office, the Director of Community Outreach, who have joined us here today on behalf of the Secretary. I would also like to recognize our State Treasurer, James Diosa, who have joined us and would like to start us with a few words. Treasurer Diosa, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And like you said, on a snowy day, it's good to see so many friends, so many advocates on this Zoom call. As you know, it's such a critical time for our families, even a few years after the pandemic, where we all recognize the need, the struggles, and who better than all of us collectively to help address some of these needs. From my standpoint, being the first Latino state treasurer, I feel an immense responsibility in ensuring that I play my part as a state office holder. And we're going to look at tackling many, I think, issues by looking at how do we, A, continue educating folks on financial literacy, starting very young, and adults. Two is, how do we secure people's retirement so that they can live and retire honorably in our state, which is fundamental. Rhode Island right now is one of the third highest states in the country where they don't have enough retirement funds to secure their retirement, which is a little scary. And third is this big concept that treasurers are creating nationally, and it's this whole idea on baby bonds, where we're able to get kids who qualify for Medicaid, invest $3,000. The state, my office would invest those funds. This would generate about $12,000 to $18,000 at the age of 18, where a child, when they turn 18, can buy a car, give a down payment on their first home, roll it into a Roth IRA, or be able to open up a business or continue their higher education. Fundamentally, I believe these three things will help close the wealth equity gap that exists and that continues to grow. And your conversation today will be very helpful as to what else we can do from my perspective, my office, and help ensure a strong financial future for people and to create real policies so that we can continue helping our families. And I think I've seen it all, being a former mayor of a community where we have a population of low-income families who's really struggled, and I saw it firsthand throughout the pandemic, to now statewide, where I'm now traveling the state and hearing from folks from all over every sector, every part of the state. So look forward to listening to your conversation, and I always appreciate the opportunity to be part of this call.
Thank you so much, Treasurer Diosa. We appreciate you being here and your leadership and all that you talk about, literacy, the retirement, and baby bonds. Our policies we support because they do offer solution when we think of building generational wealth and we think of getting income into the hands of communities that need them. So we appreciate you being here. And we have a lot of people. I know there are other leaders, policy leaders that are here, representatives and senators. Thank you and welcome. I'll be looking throughout the chat and recognizing you. But just to get started, for those who are just joining us, welcome to the Revenue Roundtable 2024. We're about to have a few presentations. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. And then we will stop the recording to hear from some of our community partners on how equitable revenue can lead to equitable policies. With that being said, I would now like to turn it over to Alan Krinsky, our Director of Research and Fiscal Policy at the Economic Progress Institute.
Thank you, Iona. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good morning. So as Iona mentioned, this evening, the governor will be delivering his annual State of the State address. And this Thursday, we eagerly await the release of the governor's proposed budget for fiscal year 2025. We would welcome, but we're not expecting any measures to raise significant revenue in the proposed budget. And what you should watch for is, does the proposed budget seek to fund policies and programs that will increase equity and help Rhode Islanders, especially those with the fewest resources? If the annual state budget is truly a statement of our values as a state, does the proposed budget embody those values? What's next in terms of that is that the budget will come out later this week. You should expect to see summaries of the budget, highlights of what's in there from EPI, from our partner advocacy organizations, and then eventually, sometime in February, an equity analysis of the proposed budget from the Equity Impact Campaign, similar to what was done last year. And then, of course, there'll be hearings at the House and Senate Finance Committees on different budget articles. So what you can do, you have the opportunity is to provide written or verbal testimony, whether on specific budget articles of interest to you, on proposed legislation throughout the session, and of course to contact elected officials about the budget or legislation. In terms of the Revenue for Rhode Islanders campaign, I just want to give a quick history. This is the fifth year or fifth legislative session of the campaign. The first 3 years, the proposal out of the campaign was to create a fourth personal income tax bracket on top of our 3-bracket system, and that this bracket would affect only the top 1% in income and their income above that amount at an 8.99% rate. And there was no specific targeting of the revenue for any purpose. Last year, some changes were made. Instead of a fourth bracket, made a little simpler by making a 3% surtax on income for the top 1%. And for the first time, proposed depositing the new revenue in a restricted receipts account to fund childcare, early education, education K through college, university, as well as roads, bridges, and public transportation as a focus of spending the new revenue. And what you see here, the chart you see here on this slide, it shows what percentage of income Rhode Islanders in different sort of income brackets paid in as a percentage of their income in state and local taxes, and shows how it's not an equitable system. And this chart came from our partners, our national partners at ITEP, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. And it's been a part of the campaign the first 4 years. ITEP has also been a really valuable partner for us at EPI. Most of you probably know about every other year Rhode Island Standard of Need report that talks about what Rhode Islanders need to meet their most basic needs and how so often they fall short of that. Behind the scenes, ITEP has long run with their sophisticated tax calculation modeling software, helped us figure out those numbers for after taxes kinds of numbers, and been a great partner in that. Just this month, ITEP has released a new Who Pays report that updates the numbers you see in the chart here for the first time in a few years. And so I would like to turn this over, introduce our partner, Carl Davis, who's the research director at ITEP, to talk about this new report and to really center this whole hour of discussion we are having. I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Carl. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. So very excited to be here. Very excited to be able to talk about our Who Pays research with you. I mean, to be honest with you, this report has been a long time in the making. It's really a massive piece of research involving pretty much everyone on our staff in some way or another. It's been a top priority for us over these last 2 years. A lot of effort to pull this together. And this report, this is the only comprehensive look at how tax systems in all 50 states are affecting people at every income level. So we've been publishing reports of this kind since the mid-90s. Occasionally, you will see government agencies do this kind of research on their own, places like Minnesota and Texas. And when you see that done, their findings are typically very close in line with ours. To to be clear, these numbers I'm going to be showing you, these look at virtually all state and local taxes. So a lot of the times when we talk about state taxes, people will focus on the income tax first. But it's crucial to keep in mind the effect of sales taxes, property taxes, fuel taxes, utility taxes, and so on. It's a long list. Altogether, we're looking at over 99% of state and local taxes nationwide in Rhode Island, and we think we're pretty close to 100% in Rhode Island's case. And when we look at how Rhode Island is taxing its residents, it's clear that the state is falling very far short of what most people consider to be a fair tax code. What I mean by that is when you ask people what tax fairness means to them, almost everyone falls into one of two camps. So the first is a group of people who say they like flat taxes because it means everyone's going to pay the same. And the second is a group that likes progressive taxation, where you ask the rich to pay more because they can afford to pay more, and because, frankly, they owe some of their good fortune to the public services and the stability that government provides. And when we look at Rhode Island's tax code, though, it's neither of these things. You know, Rhode Island right now is really not delivering on the kinds of tax policies the public wants from this perspective of tax distribution. So this is the more detailed version of the slide I just showed you, looking at taxes as a share of income. This is an update to what Alan was showing you just a minute ago. For a broad swath of middle-income families, they're accustomed to paying 10% or just shy of 10% of their income in Rhode Island taxes every year. At the bottom of the income scale, that rate is closer to 13% of income. It's a lot to ask of low-income families. And at the top, though, this is particularly concerning. The state's highest earners are paying just about 8.5% of income. And you put this all together and we see the tax rate at the bottom is about 55% higher than it is at the top. It's quite a wedge between those two groups. So how did Rhode Island get to this point? This is taking the previous chart and breaking it out into different tax types. And, you know, there's a lot of bars here, but really the core problem is not that complicated. The problem is that Rhode Island is raising most of its tax revenue with regressive taxes on what people buy or on their homes that they own or that they rent. And those expenses, they swallow up a larger share of income for low and middle income people. And when you're relying on taxing those things, those taxes will then swallow up a larger share of income for those families. So for most families, sales and excise taxes, not just the general sales tax, but the add-on taxes on purchases, other purchases, these are the largest state tax expense that most families face. And you can see that here. Most people don't realize that because it's spread, these tax payments, they're spread across so many little purchases all throughout the year. But when you add up the taxes you're paying on your utilities, your phone bill, medicine, the gas you use to get to work, it really starts to add up eventually. And especially we see at the low end for families who are facing tough economic circumstances. The same is true of property taxes, which these primarily, most of the revenue comes from taxing people's homes. And it's no secret that middle income and lower income people have to spend more of their earnings toward putting a roof over their heads. And so a tax on housing tends to swallow up a larger share of their income than it does for the wealthy. And this is true for homeowners who are writing that property tax check directly. It's also true for renters who see a substantial amount of the ultimate property tax liability passed on to them in higher rent bills. So we have these regressive sales and property taxes. These exist in every state. And a lot of variation across states then comes down to how much states are doing to offset those regressive taxes with other measures, like progressive income taxes, for example. And there are a lot of states that do a pretty good job of using their income taxes to provide balance in their tax code. And I think Massachusetts is an interesting example here, partly because it's right next door, but also because they've really made a lot of their most substantial reforms just in the last couple of years. So there are two big ways that Massachusetts income tax looks different than Rhode Island's. The first is that the state has more robust refundable tax credits for low-income earners. So it has an earned income credit at 30% of the federal instead of 16%. and it has a refundable child tax credit as well, which Rhode Island doesn't have. The second difference in Massachusetts, though, is it recently added a surtax on millionaires' income, as I'm sure folks on this call know. It's something that the voters approved in 2022. I think that really speaks to the popularity of these measures to help remedy regressive taxation. We also saw voters in Arizona a few years ago approve a higher tax rate on top earners. Part of the issue is that Rhode Island is relying less on income taxes to fund public services than most other states do. So personal and corporate income taxes make up around a quarter of overall tax revenues, give or take. It's a bit below the national average. It's lower than in most of New England, and it's a lot lower in the states that we've identified as having the least regressive tax codes. I'm talking about places like Massachusetts, also New York, New Jersey, Minnesota, and so on. And strengthening the income tax with more robust tax rates at the top would absolutely help move Rhode Island to a place that's closer in line with the states we've identified as leaders in this study. I can leave you with one final thought. When we look around the country, I think it's very concerning that most states, 41 states, are choosing to tax their highest income people at lower tax rates than any other group in the entire state. That's one of the top line findings of this study we just published last week. And there's a silver lining here, though, and that's that New England and the Northeast more generally are tending to do better than average on this issue. So there are 10 states around the country that have decided it doesn't make sense to tax their richest residents at lower rates than everyone else. And half of those 10 are in the Northeast. So if Rhode Island were to enact this proposal we're talking about, that would likely be enough to allow it to join states like Massachusetts and New York and so on, and saying, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be asking the least of those families who already have so much. And then if you'd like to read the report or check out more of our work, there are the links. And yeah, thank you everyone very much for letting me come and share our work with you and for keeping this conversation going around tax regressivity and solutions to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Carl. I don't know if there are any questions specifically for Carl about the report or about what he said. I think a few minutes if folks want to have questions to put in the chat. If not, we can go on.
We do have one question. Hi, everyone. I'm Divya. I'm a policy analyst at the Economic Progress Institute. Awilda from the Latino Policy Institute has a question about how does a regressive tax system differ from a progressive one?
Yeah, great question. So progressive taxation, it has the word progressive in it, which might imply an ideological label or political party. It's actually, in taxation, progressive has a very mathematical meaning to it. It means the rates, the tax rate gets higher as income rises. And so progressive, and regressive is the exact opposite. It's the more you make, the less you pay under a regressive system. It's really, a lot of times we'll call this an upside down tax code because a very broad swath of the public supports progressive taxation, and regressive taxation is the mirror image of it. So it's upside down from that vision that a lot of the public supports as equitable taxation.
Thank you. We have one more question from Kelly from the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. If we were to tax the rich, could that result in eliminating sales tax?
I think I think it's 45 states have a sales tax. And some of the ones that don't, places like Alaska, they have a lot of oil tax revenue. It's a relatively rare thing not to have a sales tax. I think the sales tax is important from a revenue perspective, and I think eliminating it would be a very difficult undertaking to pull that off in a way that doesn't really hinder the state's ability to fund public services. So, you know, in my view of things, I don't think it's necessary to never levy a regressive tax. You know, I think, you know, fuel taxes, for example, I think that there's a public policy purpose to that, even though that is a regressive tax. So I think having regressive taxes on the books is all right, as long as you're aware of it and you provide balance elsewhere in the tax code and you make sure you're providing offsets for lower income people so that their tax rate isn't too high and so that you're charging more for high income people. So eliminating the sales tax, I think that would be quite a heavy lift. We have seen places like New Mexico slightly reduce their sales tax rate and paired that with income tax reforms. But you'd have to be very conscious of the revenue consequence of that.
And I'll add to that to note is that Rhode Island, even within a somewhat regressive tax, has made progressive steps. So we do not tax food, medicines, and clothing up to a certain amount. So the kinds of things that that people are, particularly at the lower end of income, are buying, those things are already not taxed under those sort of essentials. There will be bills submitted this year to cut Rhode Island's sales tax. And it was actually last year that ITEP provided us with the data to show that a disproportionate amount of the tax savings there were going to go to the wealthiest or the highest income Rhode Islanders. So we do need to look carefully, recognizing, in Rhode Island in particular, recognizing that we already exempt certain basic necessities from the sales tax.
I think there's
Aaron?
one more question in
One more?
the chat, yes.
All right, sorry about that. We have Majori, apologize if I'm saying your name wrong, from the Rhode Island Organizing Project. What are the motivations behind regressive taxation? I think this will probably be the last question, so we just keep everyone on time.
Yeah, you know, we very rarely hear people defend regressive taxation outright. Sometimes it's, you know, there's an issue of if you can levy a flat rate property tax and it looks like you're doing a flat tax, but ultimately if housing is a larger share of income for low income people, it can be regressive overall. So sometimes I think you see states get into this partially accidentally. So that's, you know, we do think there's really a public service value in this kind of research we're doing and to help show that just because a tax has a flat rate doesn't mean the ultimate effect is flat. There is, you know, I think if your goal is to have very small government, very lean public services, to not invest a lot in education or childcare infrastructure, regressive taxation is one way to get you there. One finding in our study is that the states that have more progressive tax codes, or at least less regressive ones, there are very few that really have steeply progressive taxation. But if you're moving away from regressive taxes, those states tend to have more robust revenue collections overall, and there's a pretty obvious reason for that. It's that high income people receive a very large share of overall income. And so if you're choosing to reserve your lowest tax rates for those high income people who are getting an outsized share of income, your revenue system is not going to generate the same amount of revenue that it could if you were charging higher rates to that very large pot of income. So there is absolutely a connection between the revenue level and the progressivity in your system.
Okay, thank you again, Carl. And I really encourage people to take a look at this this new report. Okay, so I just want to speak a couple more minutes briefly about, I mentioned earlier, this is the 5th session we're talking for the Revenue for Rhode Islanders campaign. And I want to update everyone about some changes in the campaign. First, what's staying the same? Still looking at a 3% surtax instead of changing the bracket system, and still keeping a restricted receipts account to fund the same sorts of things, policy and programs to increase equity that we've talked about before and we introduced last year. Now, what's new? The big new reveal here is that a shift in the campaign from the top 1% in income to a millionaire's tax. That, again, parallels, I guess, the Massachusetts model and has been done elsewhere. So it would be a millionaire's tax instead of the top 1%. So a little less revenue the estimates from ITEP, $126 million this would raise annually and would affect an estimated 2,134 tax filers instead of a little over 6,000 that the top 1% measured it. So that's I suppose, the biggest change, shifting to a millionaire's tax. And I just want to make clear, this is not surtax on even on everyone who makes $1 million. It's on taxable income above $1 million after all deductions and credits have been taken. So it's only on that income above that amount. And also new in the proposed this year is to have some kind of reporting mechanism so that we all can see how the General Assembly is expending these funds. And then last of all, a name change of the campaign. It's been the Revenue for Rhode Island campaign. The steering committee decided to change that to Revenue for Rhode Islanders, really emphasizing, I think, that this revenue in a way belongs to Rhode Islanders and should be there to help Rhode Islanders across the state, all Rhode Islanders, to thrive. Just quickly, some examples about this proposal, the new proposal. So who won't be affected by the proposal? If you have taxable income, $400,000, $500,000, $750,000 a year after all the deductions and credits, this will not change how much state income tax you're paying. If you have $1 million exactly after all those deductions, you still will pay the same amount of tax you would pay under the current system. So who would be affected? Let's say you make $1,001,000 in income after your deductions. You'll pay an extra $30 in taxes to the state. At $1.1 million, it's about $3,000. And you see a couple of other examples here on the table. We mentioned Massachusetts. In November 2022, voters passed the ballot for their fair share amendment. That was a 4% surtax on millionaires on top of their 5% flat tax, with revenue targeted in a similar way to education and transportation. And the most recent, just from a few weeks ago, the estimates are of $1.5 billion in estimated revenue for the first year of this millionaire's tax. So obviously we're not as large as Massachusetts, but proportionally we could expect a significant amount of revenue from a millionaire's tax in Rhode Island. So now I want to turn this over to the sponsors of the legislation, and just note that the prospects for acting at this session, just the context here is that the ARPA funds, other federal aid, is running out over the next year or two. And this proposal would start with tax year 2025. So we're talking about next year, and then when people file their taxes 2 years from now, basically, that's when the revenue will start to come in. So it's really an investment planning for the future. And as Carl noted, this is a popular proposal. It passed the ballot in Massachusetts. Polls in Rhode Island, elsewhere, have shown that people perceive the tax code as unfairly tilted to those with the highest income and wealth. So this would be a popular proposal as well. So now I guess maybe turn over first to Representative Alzate, followed by Senator Murray, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much for that, Alan. Hi, everyone. Karen Alzate, rep for Pawtucket and Central Falls. And I think this is my 5th year. Yeah, my 5th year with this bill. There are some really great changes to this bill. So to make sure that we are really listening to what it is that the leadership wants. So I think that currently, today or tonight, we're going to be hearing what the governor's proposal is. And I think that's going to be really helpful to be able to use what it is that he put in his budget and how we can leverage this, in a way, a new bill, right? Every time that we hear from our leadership, both from the speaker and the Senate president, we're hearing about making sure that we don't have any more money, right? That's something that we continue to hear. And so I think that this bill is really going to allow us to let them say that we don't have any more money, but we have a solution for that. Since I've had this bill, every time an issue of not being able to fund some of the services that are needed in order to move our state forward, you can always hear me say, I have a solution for that. And I don't do this alone, right? When we talk about COVID really hit us really hard. And if anything, it really highlighted the inequities in our communities. We might have known about them, but it actually brought them to the forefront. When we talked about the communities that were hit the hardest, Central Falls was one of the communities that hit the hardest, but my district actually was hit the hardest in the whole state. With multifamily homes, both in Pawtucket and in Central Falls, with a lot of families losing their home because of not being able to go to work, some people not being able to afford their rent anymore because they weren't getting any income. A lot of our undocumented families were not able to apply for any of the services that were being provided during the pandemic. This is economic mobility for a lot of us. And like the treasurer said, being able to set us up for the future with possibly the baby bond bills that he's talking about, and so many of our colleagues across the country. My call to action, and I think this is my own call to action for so many of you, is please continue to reach out to the leadership. Please talk to your reps and senators, even if you live in a more conservative district. Please make sure that this is a top priority for my colleagues to continue to talk to our leadership. Sitting on finance, we get to hear a lot of the asks from a lot of our agencies. And the majority of our agencies are always asking for either more employees or for more money. Today is a great example of why this bill is so needed. Even though we are changing it and we will be ideally getting a little bit less revenue than what we have done in the past, this is a step in the right direction. We really need to make sure that we have money to plow our streets, because I know so many people in the state, we don't have the money to plow our streets. We need to make sure that RIPTA is fully funded. We need to make sure that education is fully funded for when it starts with kindergarten or early childhood. These are the same things that we hear year after year from so many of our constituents, but it's also the programs that get cut first when we hear from our leadership when they say we don't have money to fund these programs. We're really spending a lot of money on Band-Aid solutions. And this is a great step in the right direction to make sure that we are addressing the problems head on and we're not letting the problem for somebody else. And so my call to action to all of you is to please support myself and the senator in this. Please continue to talk to your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, educate your legislators who are going to be against something like this. You all have the power to do that. There's many different avenues. And Rhode Island loves to see what Connecticut and Massachusetts are doing. And so this is, right now we have a really great platform with Massachusetts and all the money that they've made from putting their initiative on the ballot. This is really popular amongst a majority of Rhode Islanders. So my call to action to you is to please continue to elevate this legislation. Call whoever you need to call, bring them to the State House, and please help us move this bill along, because these types of bills are never just done with people in the chamber. They're always done with the help of all of you. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone who put this together. I'll be really quick because I actually have to jet off to work after this, but this idea that is really central, and we touched upon it in the presentation, is that the private depends upon the public, right? Taxes fund public resources, things like public education, highways, many other public services that the rep has outlined. And so taxes fund public resources, services that we all use. And that idea obviously is central to democracy, but millionaires also benefit from these public resources. And because they do, that they should pay their fair share, because that benefits everyone. It is about equity, it is about fairness, and it is about everybody paying their fair share And I would just reiterate that when Rep. Alzate says, please reach out to your senators, please reach out to your representatives and let them know that this is a top priority for you. Let them know, some of them that may be a little hesitant to support this, or that maybe are, pushing some of those tropes, such as the millionaire flight myth, that we just need to correct them and let them know that, this is something that is the right thing to do and that now is the time to do it. So I thank you all for being here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our champions. I know we're all muted, but give them a shout out, a hand up, because it's really important to have legislative champions like Rep. Alzate and Senator Murray. This is an issue that we believe can change lives in Rhode Island, and for them to take this on as one of their many other priorities they have, we really appreciate you. We stand with you because we know this is important to the state of Rhode Island. So thank you for being here, and thanks for really fighting on behalf of communities who are forgotten, because it is not the only legislation that you both fight on. And so it's good to see you in this space for communities that need the advocacy. So we appreciate you, because we cannot introduce legislation and we rely on our champions at the State House to push forward these things. So thank you so much. We're gonna stop the recording now.